final touch to the blog, we're going to add sentiment analysis to the comments so we can see what people think of each post. To do this, you could train a model, but there are several problems with that. First of all, sentiment analysis is something that's been done a lot already, so we'd be reinventing the wheel. Two, it's going to take a lot of time and resources to create a model that's going to be accurate enough. Very few companies can do things at Microsoft scale. And Microsoft realizes this, and so they created the Azure Cognitive Services. So let's go into the portal. I'm going to go back home and create a resource. And I'm going to look for language service. There it is. And I'll select the one from Microsoft. So the language service is part of the Azure Cognitive Services, as it says here. And this allows us to do a number of different things with text. And one of them is sentiment analysis. Now the language service is basically, it's a REST API that exposes a model that Microsoft is trained for. It's a gigantic model that, again, we would have a hard time maintaining and creating on our own. And Microsoft makes this available to us. And it also, there is an SDK for Python, so we don't have to deal with JSON or network requests or anything. It's actually one line of code. So let's go ahead and create an instance of that service. And these are the default features over here, sentiment analysis, and then there's some others which could play around with later. These are custom features that you can add, but I don't need any of those. I'm just going to go ahead and create the resource. Again, I have to choose a resource group. It's already in the East US, which is where I want to keep everything. And then I'll say MemPy January 23 Lang, or the name, and the pricing tier. Again, I'm focusing on what's free forever, and so you want to select this one. Gives you 5,000 transactions for every 30 days, so you can use this, 150 times a day. And then you have to check this box down here that says you're not going to do this, not going to use this for any nefarious purpose. After that, I can go to Review and Create, and Create. Alright, that took about 2 minutes to create. I sped it up again. But let's go to the resource and see how we're going to actually use this. Now, you don't want just anybody to be able to consume your 5,000 units a month. So we want to go over here to this Keys and Endpoint section. And it's going to give us two pieces of information that we need, two pieces of data. First of all is a key. And the key is kind of like a password. And they give you two of them. And in case one of them is compromised, you can actually regenerate them up here. The other part is the endpoint, which is going to be the address of the REST service. Now, just like we didn't want to store our connection string out in the open or embedded into the code, we're not going to want to do that with the key either. And for convenience, we'll also store the language point in an environment variable, or in Azure App Service speak, an application setting. So I'll go over here and open up my app service in a new window, or a new tab. Where's my app service? There it is. And I'll go over to my configuration, and I'll add a couple of new application settings. For the key, I'll create one called language key. As you can see, I've already done this. Went for the user group the other night. And I'll copy the key, and I'll paste that. Okay. And then I'll create another one that I'll call language endpoint. And I'll copy the endpoint and put it into an environment variable as well. And of course I have to save, which will restart the application, but as we saw in the previous video, this only takes a few seconds. And it's done. Alright, now I can go back to my code space, into the code, and set up the language service. And a lot of this I'm going to copy and paste. So first thing that I have to do is install the package for the SDK. And even though I'm not going to run this locally, I'm only going to run it on Azure, go ahead and pip install Azure AI Text Analytics. Now what's more important Then installing it locally, as we saw in the previous video, is that I add that to the requirements.txt. Now let's go back over to app.py, get a couple of imports. So we're going to need the text analytics client and the Azure key credential. Then I'm going to need to get the environment variables, or the values for the environment variables. So I get the language key, environment variable / application setting, and the endpoint as well. Then I'll create an instance of Azure key credential using the key, and then the client itself that will do the heavy lifting, talking to the API, and it'll use that endpoint and the credentials. Now, like I said, we're going to want to perform the sentiment analysis when a new comment is posted. Let's go down here to the blog detail route, and it actually takes only a single line of code to do this. So Azure Client Sentiment Analysis, and you're going to pass it a series of what are called documents, which are just going to be bodies of text. They're strings, and it wants a list of those. So notice I have to put that comment body from the form into a list, and then it's going to return a list of results. And since there's only one, in this case, since there's only one document, I know I need to get the first one. Now this sentiment object is going to have a set of confidence scores. One for positive sentiment, one for negative sentiment, and one for neutral sentiment. And it's going to give me a probability of what it thinks each one is equal to. And they're all going to sum up to 1. So if I put a comment that's strongly positive in there, it's going to say, okay, hey, this is 90% positive and 8% negative and 2% neutral, or something like that. And I can get that, and I want to take all of that information and I want to put it into the new comment. So I want to store the positive probability, the negative probability, and the neutral probability. Everything else will be the same. Then I want to push that onto the comments list, or the comments array rather, in the JSON. Now, in order to display this, I'm going to add a little bit of code here. So when I retrieve this post, it's going to retrieve also the sentiment scores. And I want to take the average of each one, positive, negative, and neutral. Now, I want to make sure, first of all, that I have comments. Because if I don't have, because I'm going to divide each sum by the length of the comments, and of course if that's 0, this is going to throw an exception, and we're going to see that application error screen again. If there are comments, then for each comment I'm simply going to sum up the positive, negative, and neutral scores and then divide them by the total length of the comments, and then I'll put them in a tuple and send them to the template. Right there. And then I just need to modify my blog detail template to show those sentiment scores. And it should go right there. So it'll show the positive, negative, and neutral scores, bringing them out of the template, out of the tuple rather. All right, that's all that I should need. I'm going to pause. Before I pause, I'm going to go over here, and again, my requirements.txt does have Azure Analytics Text AI in it. And I'm going to redeploy this app one more time. And I'll pause the video. When we come back, we'll take a look at it. So our deployment is ready. Okay, the deployment is complete, and just want to show you a couple things in interest of full disclosure. There's where it's pulling down the packages for the Azure Cognitive Services. Also, because the document that I'd previously posted in Cosmos DB did not have any sentiment scores, or the comments didn't have any sentiment scores, I went ahead and deleted it. You wouldn't do this in production, but it's just easier in this case. And now I can browse to the website and open. And here's the MemPy blog. And we'll go to blog new. And I'll again create my first post This is the first post for the Azure Cognitive Services. And we'll add that. And everything right now is working the same way. But notice this time we have the sentiment scores. So let's leave a comment. Azure Cognitive Services are awesome. And leave a comment. And it thought that was a positive comment, so now we have 100% positive. But say on the other hand, I don't like this post. Now that was a fairly negative comment, because notice that our positive sentiment went down, our negative sentiment increased, and our neutral sentiment even. So then I could say I don't have an opinion, and this one should be rather neutral. Yeah, see, the neutral sentiment went way up. And then I could again say, but I love Azure so much, it's the best. And now our positive sentiment will go back up. And if we look inside of Cosmos DB, refresh this, we'll see that all of those scores are being saved. In the last video, I'm going to go ahead and summarize what we did.